happening?" That is the only thought screaming through Elias's mind as his lungs burn with the icy air of the taiga. Every breath feels like swallowing broken glass, and every step through the waist-deep snow is a gamble against a heart that is ready to quit. Behind him, the shadows of the ancient pines dance in the twilight, but one shadow is moving differently. It isn't swaying with the wind, it is gliding. It is silent, relentless, and impossibly fast. Elias doesn't need to look back to know that the apex predator of these forgotten woods has chosen him. He is a dying man in a living nightmare, being hunted by a creature that shouldn't exist. Welcome to Chronicle Nexus, where today we dive into a story that blurs the line between myth and survival, between the hunter and the hunted. This is the tale of a man who thought he was running for his life, only to realize that the monster behind him was the only thing keeping him alive. Not because she pitied him, but because he carried something she couldn't afford to lose. The blizzard screams louder now, a white wall of static that erases the horizon. Elias stumbles, his frostbitten fingers losing their grip on the jagged rock face. He collapses into a drift, the cold seeping into his bones like lead. He waits for the teeth. He waits for the crushing weight of a 400-pound beast to end his misery. But instead of the sharp sting of a killing bite, there is only a strange, rhythmic thrumming. He opens his eyes, squinting through the crystalline lashes, and sees her. She is breathtaking. A wolf the size of a grizzly, her fur a shimmering, ethereal silver that seems to hold the moonlight even in the dead of day. Her eyes aren't the yellow of a common predator. They are a deep, piercing violet, swirling with a strange intelligence that feels ancient. She stands over him, not with the snarl of a killer, but with the posture of a guardian. Her warmth radiates off her in waves, a literal heat that begins to thaw the ice on Elias's jacket. He tries to crawl away, his instinct for survival overriding his awe, but she gently nudges him back with a snout that feels like velvet over steel. He is terrified. He is confused. He has spent the last 3 days fleeing from the wreckage of his research expedition, believing this creature was the one who slaughtered his team. He saw the flashes of silver in the dark, heard the screams that were cut short by the snapping of bone. He thought he was the final prize, the last morsel in a bloody feast. He clutches his chest, feeling the sharp, rectangular bulge beneath his parka, the artifact he recovered from the temple ruins. It pulses. It glows a faint, rhythmic amber, mirroring the beat of his own panicked heart. Elias gasps as the silver wolf leans down. She doesn't go for his throat. Instead, her nose touches the fabric directly over the artifact. A low, melodic hum vibrates from her chest, a sound so resonant it makes Elias's vision blur. For a moment, the pain in his frostbitten legs vanishes. He sees visions of a world where the forests were taller than the clouds and the stars spoke to the earth. Turns out there's something we haven't understood yet. We often assume that in the wild, the predator is driven by hunger. We assume the chase is about the meat and the bone, but as Elias looked into those violet eyes, he realized the terrifying truth. He wasn't the prey. He was the vessel. The creature didn't want his life. She needed what was buried deep inside him. Something he hadn't even realized had fused with his very soul the moment he touched the sun shard in the ruins. The chase hadn't been a hunt. It had been a herding. She wasn't chasing him to kill him. She was driving him away from the others. And as a low, guttural growl erupted from the tree line behind them, Elias finally saw who the real monsters were. Pale, spindly figures with elongated limbs, and eyes like black oil emerged from the shadows. They were the swarm, beings of rot and shadow that thrived on the energy of the artifact Elias carried. The silver wolf stepped forward, her fur bristling as sparks of blue static jumped between her hairs. She was a creature of the light, a guardian of the balance, and Elias was her charge. But the cost of protection is never free. As she turned her head to look at him one last time before lunging at the shadow creatures, Elias saw a flash of sorrow in her gaze. She needed the shard to heal her dying land, and the only way to get it out of him was a process that no human was ever meant to survive. He watched in a trance as the wolf tore through the swarm, a whirlwind of silver fur and violet light. She fought with a ferocity that was both beautiful and horrifying. Every time one of the shadow beasts got close to Elias, she would let out a bark that sent a shockwave through the clearing, disintegrating the attackers into ash. She was saving him, yes, she was keeping his heart beating. But as the amber glow in his chest grew hotter, burning through his skin, he realized the cruel irony of his situation. The very thing that made him valuable to her was the thing that was slowly killing him. The sun shard was consuming his life force to power the wolf's protection. He was the battery for his own bodyguard. He reached out a trembling hand, touching the wolf's flank as she returned to his side, panting, her silver fur stained with the black ichor of her enemies. She leaned into his touch, a soft whine escaping her throat. In that moment, Elias felt a psychic link snap into place. He saw her memories, a dying forest, a pack lost to the shadow, and the desperate need for the light he carried. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a beacon, and the beautiful creature standing over him was both his savior and his eventual executioner. He looked at the vast, frozen wilderness ahead of them. They had miles to go before they reached the altar of the first moon. He didn't know if his heart would last that long, or if the wolf would let him die once she had what she needed. But as she curled her massive body around him to shield him from the rising gale, Elias felt a strange sense of peace. If he was going to die, he would die in the company of a goddess. But the mystery was far from over. As the night deepened, Elias noticed something disturbing. The amber glow wasn't just coming from the artifact. It was spreading through his veins. His fingernails were turning a translucent gold, and his breath no longer came out as steam. He was changing. The artifact wasn't just inside him, it was rewriting his biology. And the wolf, she wasn't just waiting for him to die. She was waiting for him to become something else. Stay tuned to Chronicle Nexus as we continue this journey into the heart of the frost, where the line between man and myth disappears entirely. The real secret of what lies inside Elias is about to be revealed, and it's something that will change the fate of the world forever. The cold was no longer a physical sensation for Elias. It had become a living, breathing entity that pulsed in sync with his own heartbeat. As the Solaris shard, the ancient artifact embedded within his chest, continued to vibrate, the snow beneath his feet didn't just melt, it evaporated into a fine, glowing mist. Every breath he took felt like inhaling liquid starlight, and every exhale felt like releasing a piece of his humanity. He looked down at his hands, watching as the veins beneath his skin began to glow with a soft, ethereal luminescence. The transformation was accelerating, and the wolf, the silver-furred titan of the frost, stood only a few yards away, her golden eyes reflecting the shimmering light emanating from his chest. She didn't move to attack. Instead, she tilted her head, a gesture so profoundly intelligent it sent a shiver down Elias's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was observing a metamorphosis that had been prophesied for eons, A moment where the physical realm and the primordial energies of the old world finally collided. Elias tried to speak, but his voice was gone, replaced by a low, harmonic hum that resonated in the air around them. He realized then that the wolf wasn't just a predator or a guardian, she was a catalyst. She was the only thing standing between him and a total biological collapse. As they began to move deeper into the crystalline forest, a strange realization dawned on Elias. There was something we hadn't understood yet about the nature of his flight. He hadn't been running away from a monster, he had been running toward his own destiny, and the wolf had been steering him the entire time. She wasn't chasing him to consume him, she was herding him toward the only place where the shard could be stabilized. Every time he had strayed toward the treacherous cliffs or the thinning ice of the frozen lakes, she had appeared, baring her teeth, not in malice, but as a stern correction of his path. She knew the geography of this transformation better than he knew his own name. The internal pressure within Elias's ribcage grew. It felt as though a sun were trying to birth itself from within his sternum. The Solaris shard was no longer a separate object. It was weaving its energy into his nervous system, mapping out new pathways for a power that no human body was ever meant to hold. He collapsed to his knees, the heat from his skin turning the ground into a pool of water. The wolf approached him then, her footsteps silent despite her massive size. She pressed her cold, wet nose against his forehead, and for a fleeting second, Elias saw visions, not of his own life, but of the world's beginning. He saw the wolf's ancestors guarding the first fires of creation, and he saw the shard falling from the heavens like a teardrop from a god. This was the conflict that defined their journey. Elias wanted to remain human, to return to the warmth of a hearth. He longed for the simplicity of a life governed by time and gravity, but the shard required a vessel that transcended those limitations. The wolf was the midwife to this evolution, and she was fiercely protective of the cargo Elias carried. When the shadows of the forest began to stir, ancient, corrupted spirits drawn to the shard's light like moths to a flame, the wolf's protective nature turned into a terrifying display of celestial fury. She moved like a blur of silver lightning. She tore through the ethereal hunters that tried to siphon the energy from Elias's body. She was protecting the future of the realm. As the hours blurred into a singular glowing eternity, the landscape began to change. The trees were no longer made of wood. The forest was now translucent quartz that hummed in harmony with Elias's chest. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone. They were approaching the Nexus, the high-altitude sanctuary where the transformation would reach its zenith. Elias felt a strange sense of gratitude. Without her, the raw power of the shard would have shattered his mind. She was acting as a lightning rod for the energy. However, the journey was far from over, and the secret of their connection went deeper than survival. And this last part is what we often miss when we look at legends of the great wolf and the starbearer. We often think of them as two separate entities, the protector and the protected. But as Elias looked into her eyes during a moment of respite, he saw a reflection of himself that wasn't human. He saw the same golden fire, the same ancient hunger for balance. The shard wasn't just changing his biology, it was bridging their souls. He realized with a jolt of terror and awe that the wolf wasn't waiting for him to become something else. She was waiting for him to remember who he had always been. The bond between them was symbiotic in the most literal sense. The wolf needed the shard to maintain the winter's eternal balance, and the shard needed the wolf's primal strength to anchor it to the earth. Elias was the bridge, the living conduit between the celestial and the terrestrial. But being a bridge means being stretched to the breaking point. His skin began to take on a metallic sheen, and his vision shifted into a spectrum where he could see the flow of life force in everything. The trees, the wind, and the wolf herself. He could see her heartbeat, a slow, powerful rhythm that pulsed like a drum in the deep earth. They reached the base of the Great Peak, the highest point in the frozen wastes. The wind here was fierce enough to strip the flesh from bone, but around Elias and the wolf, there was a pocket of absolute calm. The shard was now glowing so brightly that Elias was a silhouette of pure white light. The pain had transitioned into a state of hyper-awareness. He could feel every snowflake falling for miles around. He could feel the rotation of the planet itself. The wolf stood at the start of the final ascent, her fur bristling with static electricity. She let out a howl that didn't sound like an animal's cry, but like a choir of 1,000 voices singing in a forgotten language. Elias realized then that the beautiful wolf wasn't just a creature of flesh and blood. She was a manifestation of the world's will, a guardian spirit that had waited millennia for a heart strong enough to carry the Solaris shard. And he, the man who had been running for his life, was the only one who could complete the cycle. But as they prepared for the final climb, a new threat emerged from the periphery of his heightened senses. Something was coming that didn't want the balance restored. Something that thrived in the cold, dark spaces where the light of the shard couldn't reach. The transition from man to something more was almost complete, but the most dangerous part of the ritual was yet to come. The wolf turned to Elias, her eyes burning with an urgency that transcended words. She needed him to step into the center of the storm. But to do so, he would have to let go of the last vestige of his human fear. He would have to trust the beast that had hunted him, the creature that now stood as his only ally in a world that was rapidly dissolving into light and shadow. As they stepped onto the path that led to the summit, the very ground began to shake. The final revelation was at hand, and the price of the shard's power was about to be demanded. Elias took a breath that tasted of the beginning of time, and followed the silver ghost into the whiteout. The world as he knew it was gone, and what remained was a destiny he was finally ready to embrace. Stay with us as we move toward the final chapter of this epic saga. The peak is in sight, the enemies are closing in, and the true reason why the wolf needed what was inside Elias is about to shatter everything you thought you knew about this story. This is Chronicle Nexus, and the transformation is only just beginning. The snow did not just fall, it screamed. It was a horizontal sheet of ice that erased the horizon, turning the world into a featureless void of white. Elias could no longer feel his feet. Every breath was a gamble against the freezing air that threatened to crystallize his lungs. But as he stepped into that blinding veil, following the rhythmic, ghostly shimmer of the silver wolf, a singular, haunting question burned hotter than the frostbite. Why did this happen? Why was he, an ordinary man with an ordinary life, chosen to be the vessel for something so ancient that it drew a godlike creature from the shadows of myth? The answer lay in the pulse. Beneath his ribs, that golden thrumming was no longer a faint echo. It was a roar. The wolf, whom he had begun to think of as Lyra, slowed her pace. She turned her head, her eyes glowing with an intensity that defied the storm. She wasn't just leading him, she was tethering him to reality. Without her silhouette to guide him, Elias knew he would have wandered into a drift and become a permanent monument to the winter. But as they ascended the jagged spine of the Frostweaver Peaks, the pursuit intensified. Behind them, the shadows were no longer just figments of his exhaustion. They were the iron-bound, mercenaries of the old world, who traded their humanity for the ability to hunt the supernatural. They didn't want the wolf. They wanted what was ripening inside Elias. To them, he was a living safe, a biological vault containing the origin spark, a fragment of the first fire that once warmed the universe. Elias stumbled, his knees hitting the jagged rock. He looked up, expecting to see the wolf continuing her climb, but she was standing over him. Her warmth was a physical wall against the wind. She leaned down, her muzzle inches from his face, and for the first time, Elias didn't feel the urge to run. He felt a profound, telepathic grief. She wasn't stalking him. She was mourning him. It turns out there's something we didn't understand yet about the nature of this bond. We often think of a savior as someone who keeps us exactly as we are, protecting our current state. But as Lyra let out a low, vibrational hum that resonated through Elias's very marrow, the truth began to bleed through. The wolf didn't just need what was inside him to save herself. She needed it to resurrect a world that had been cold for 10,000 years. And the price of that extraction was never meant to be survival. It was meant to be transfiguration. The air around them began to warp. The ironbound were close now, their black powder lanterns flickering like dying stars in the distance. They began to fire, the crack of rifles echoing like thunderclaps, but the bullets didn't hit Elias. They hit a shimmering barrier of frost that Lyra had exhaled into existence. She was a fortress of fur and fang, standing between the greed of man and the destiny of the soul. As the conflict reached a fever pitch, Elias felt the spark inside him react to the violence. It wasn't a peaceful glow anymore. It was a searing, agonizing heat. He realized then that the wolf hadn't been chasing him to hunt him. She had been chasing him to stabilize him. Without her presence, the energy inside him would have detonated, leveling the mountain and everything on it. He was a ticking clock, and she was the only one who knew how to wind the gears. The detail we often overlook in these moments of high tension is the silence. Between the roars of the wind and the shouts of the hunters, there was a psychic stillness. Lyra nudged his chest with her head, her fur soft as starlight despite the brutality of the environment. In that touch, Elias saw visions. He saw the world before the ice, a world of emerald forests and suns that never set. He saw Lyra's ancestors running across plains of liquid gold, and he saw himself, not as a victim, but as a bridge. And this last part is what we often miss when we talk about sacrifice and destiny. We focus so much on the hero and the monster that we forget the third element, the transformation. It wasn't that Elias had to die for the wolf to live, or that the wolf had to die for Elias to escape. The secret that was about to shatter Elias's understanding of his own existence was far more complex. The thing inside him wasn't a separate object. It was his own soul, finally waking up after eons of slumber, fueled by the proximity of its ancient guardian. The wolf didn't need a thing inside him. She needed the man he was becoming. Suddenly, the ground beneath them groaned. An avalanche, triggered by the hunter's explosives, began to tumble from the peaks above. A wall of white death, thousands of tons of ice, was hurtling toward them. The ironbound screamed as they were swallowed by the very mountain they sought to conquer. Elias closed his eyes, bracing for the end, but he felt a massive weight heave him upward. Lyra had grabbed him by the scruff of his heavy coat, her strength impossible, and leaped. They weren't falling. They were soaring over the edge of a precipice into a hidden valley that shouldn't have existed. As they descended through the mist, the temperature began to rise. The whiteout faded into a soft, ethereal teal. They landed on a bed of moss that felt like velvet. Elias rolled onto his back, gasping for air that tasted of jasmine and ancient ozone. He looked up and saw that they were inside a massive geode, a cavern of crystal that hummed with the same frequency as his own heart. Lyra stood before him, her silver coat glowing so brightly it was painful to look at. She began to change. Her lupine form flickered, stretching and softening, the predatory lines of her body melting into something more humanoid, yet still distinctly alien. The monster was a mask. The beast was a suit of armor worn to endure the harshness of a dying world. As the glow dimmed, a figure stood where the wolf had been. She was tall, draped in shimmering furs, with eyes that still held the depths of the sapphire sea. She walked toward Elias, who was still trembling on the moss. She reached out a hand, and as her fingers brushed his chest, the origin spark flared one last time, illuminating the entire cavern in a blinding golden dawn. "You've carried it well, Elias," she whispered, her voice sounding like 1,000 harps played at once. But the journey through the ice was only the trial. Now comes the purpose. The emotional weight of that moment hit him like a physical blow. All the fear, the running, the confusion, it wasn't a chase, it was a pilgrimage. He looked into her eyes and realized that the insight she needed wasn't just the energy in his chest. It was his courage, his willingness to follow a ghost into the dark when everything told him to turn back. But as the cavern began to pulse with new life, and the first flowers began to bloom in the cracks of the crystals, a new shadow appeared at the entrance of the sanctuary. The hunters were gone, but something far worse had followed them, a darkness that didn't want the light, but wanted to extinguish it forever. The transition was complete, but the war had just found its new battlefield. Stay with us as we head into the final, breathtaking conclusion of this journey. The secret of the spark is out. The Guardian has revealed her true face, and the final sacrifice is the only thing standing between a new world and eternal night. This is Chronicle Nexus, and the real story is just beginning. What would you give to save a world you never knew existed? Don't go anywhere. The answer is coming next. The silence that followed the transformation was heavier than any roar. In the wake of the blinding light, the man, breathless and trembling, looked up to see the creature no longer as a predator of the dark, but as a sentinel of the dawn. Her silver fur didn't just catch the light, it seemed to generate it, pulsing with a rhythmic lunar glow that matched the frantic beating of his own heart. He had spent hours, perhaps days, running from a nightmare, only to realize that the nightmare was the only thing keeping him from something far more ancient and far more hungry. The transition was complete, but the war had just found its new battlefield. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The man's hands were stained with the soil of the forest floor, his clothes tattered by the brambles of a chase that should have killed him. He looked at the wolf, expecting her to lung, expecting the finality of teeth and claw. Instead, she lowered her massive, elegant head, her eyes a swirling nebula of gold and violet, locking onto his chest. Specifically, she was looking at the soft golden radiance beginning to seep through his skin, right where his heart lay. It was the spark. It wasn't just a metaphor for life. It was a physical, burning core of primordial energy that had been dormant within him since the moment of his birth, waiting for this exact alignment of stars to ignite. He reached out a shaking hand, not to fight, but to understand. As his fingers brushed the coarse, starlight-infused fur of her shoulder, a jolt of pure memory flooded his mind. He didn't just see her past, he felt it. He felt the centuries she had spent guarding the threshold between the world of men and the world of the eternal wilds. He felt her loneliness, her duty, and the crushing weight of a promise made to a creator long forgotten. She wasn't hunting him to feed. She was hunting him to stabilize the very essence that was currently threatening to tear his human body apart. Apparently, there is something we haven't understood yet. The spark wasn't a gift, it was a beacon. And while it provided life to the world, it acted as a homing signal for the things that lived in the cracks between dimensions. The wolf creature, this guardian of the silver veil, had been intercepting those horrors before they could reach him. Every shadow he thought he saw during his flight, every snap of a twig he attributed to her, had actually been the sound of her crushing the throat of a shadow stalker. She hadn't been the hunter. She had been the shield. As the man absorbed this truth, the air around them began to grow cold, unnaturally cold. The vibrant greens of the forest started to wilt into a sickly ashen gray. The guardian let out a low, mournful howl, a sound that vibrated in the man's marrow. She stepped over him, her body forming a protective arch, her hackles rising as the shadows at the edge of the clearing began to lengthen and detach themselves from the trees. The spark within the man flared in response to the encroaching darkness. It was a symbiotic reaction. The more afraid he became, the brighter the spark burned, and the brighter it burned, the easier it was for the others to find him. He realized then that his fear was their greatest weapon. The wolf looked back at him, her eyes pleading for a calm he didn't know how to find. She needed him to master the fire inside, or they would both be consumed by the void that was currently spilling into the clearing. They began to move, no longer in a chase, but in a desperate trek toward the high altar of the great peaks. The guardian nudged him forward, her presence a constant, warm pressure against his side. Every step the man took felt heavier than the last. The spark was expanding, vibrating at a frequency that made his vision blur. He started to see the world not as trees and stones, but as threads of energy. He saw the life force of the grass, the ancient songs of the rocks, and the terrifying, hollow emptiness of the creatures following them in the periphery. As they climbed higher, the atmosphere grew thin and charged with static electricity. The man's skin began to crack, gold light weeping from the fissures like liquid sun. The pain was exquisite, a mixture of total agony and divine euphoria. He realized that his humanity was a vessel that was never meant to hold something this vast. He was a clay jar holding a star, and the clay was beginning to shatter. And this last part is what we often miss. We often think of salvation as a peaceful resolution, a return to the way things were. But as the man looked at the guardian, he saw the sorrow in her eyes. She knew that the only way to save the world was to let the spark reach its destination. But she also knew that the destination would be the end of the man who carried it. To save the light, the vessel must be broken. She hadn't saved him just to keep him alive. She had saved him so that his sacrifice would mean something. She was a shepherd, leading a lamb to an altar, and her grief was the price of her divinity. The final ascent was a blur of violence and light. The shadow stalkers made their move, lunging from the darkness in a swarm of claws and teeth. The guardian was a whirlwind of silver fury, tearing through the void beings with a desperate protective rage. She took hits that would have felled a mountain, gashes of black ichor marring her beautiful fur, but she never faltered. She stayed between him and the end of the world, a wall of living starlight. The man, driven by a will that was no longer entirely his own, reached the summit. The high altar was a simple circle of white stone, untouched by the decay of the forest below. As he stepped into the center, the spark within him reached its zenith. The world went quiet. The sounds of the battle below faded into a distant hum. He looked down at his hands. They were translucent now, glowing with the intensity of 1,000 suns. He turned to look at the wolf one last time. She stood at the edge of the circle, her body broken and bleeding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had fulfilled her vow. She had brought the spark to the hearth. In her eyes, he didn't see a monster, and he didn't see a goddess. He saw a friend. He saw a soul that had waited an eternity for this moment of release. The man understood now. The creature didn't need what was inside him for power or for hunger. She needed it to restart the heart of a dying world, a world that had forgotten how to dream. And he, the runner, the coward, the accidental carrier of light, was the only one who could turn the key. The final sacrifice is not the end of a story, but the beginning of a legacy. The man closed his eyes, thinking of the world he was leaving behind and the one he was about to create. He reached deep within himself, grabbing hold of the burning core of his being, and prepared to give it all away. But as the light began to explode outward, a final, chilling realization struck him. The spark wasn't just energy, it was a map. And the map was pointing to something buried deep beneath the very altar he stood upon, something that had been waiting for the spark to return home so it could finally wake up. What happens when the Savior becomes the catalyst for an even greater power? And what will the Guardian do when she realizes the man she protected wasn't just a vessel, but a key to a door that was never meant to be opened? The final chapter is upon us. Don't look away. The true cost of the light is about to be revealed. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to witness the breathtaking finale of The Spark and the Sentinel. The end is just the beginning. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Chronicle Nexus. You are standing at the threshold of the ultimate revelation. When we last left our journey, the man had finally opened his eyes, staring into the gaze of the creature he feared most. But fear is a veil, and today we tear that veil away to reveal a truth more ancient than the stars themselves. As Elias wakes, the air around him doesn't smell of blood or decay, but of ozone, crushed lilies, and the cold, crisp scent of the highest mountain peaks. He is not in a larder. He is in a cathedral of ice and light. The great wolf, the silver sentinel, is not hovering over him with bared teeth, but is curled in a protective circle. Her fur emitting a soft, rhythmic pulse of bioluminescence that mimics the beating of a heart. The realization hits him like a physical blow. She wasn't hunting him to end him. She was hurting him. She was driving him away from the edges of the forest where the real shadows dwell, those formless, hungry voids that leave nothing behind. But the question remains, why him? What could a mortal, trembling with exhaustion and fear, possess that a celestial being of such power would deem worth saving? Elias moves to stand, and as he does, his chest glows with an amber warmth. It is the spark, the fragment of the first sun that he had carried unknowingly since birth. To him, it was a burden, a source of constant anxiety and strange dreams. To the wolf, it is the only thing that can stop the eternal night from consuming her realm. But here is where the conflict sharpens into a razor's edge. The shadows that chased Elias have found the sanctuary.
They scratch at the crystalline walls of the cave, their whispers turning the air cold enough to shatter bone.
They don't want to kill Elias. They want to feast on the spark. And the wolf, for all her majesty, is weakening. Every time she fought them off in the woods, every time she shielded him with her own body, she gave a piece of her life force to keep his light from being snuffed out. She looks at him now, her eyes swirling with nebulae and sorrow. She cannot take the spark from him by force. If she did, it would turn into ash. It must be given. This is the secret the ancient texts never dared to whisper. The guardian cannot survive without the heart, and the heart cannot beat without the guardian. The walls begin to crack. The darkness outside is no longer just a shadow. It is a sentient malice, a tide of ink seeking to drown the last ember of hope. The wolf stands, her legs trembling, but her head held high. She prepares to make her final stand, to die so that he might live just a few minutes longer. And this last part is what we often miss. We often think that being saved means being carried to safety, while we remain passive. We think the hero is the one with the claws and the power, but the truth is far more profound. As Elias watches the Silver Sentinel prepare to sacrifice herself for him, he realizes that his role isn't to be a vessel to be protected. He is the key, but the key is useless unless it turns the lock. The something inside him wasn't just a battery for her power. It was his humanity, his willingness to face the dark, and his capacity for empathy. He realizes that the wolf didn't save him because she needed his energy like a predator needs prey. She saved him because his spark is the only thing that can heal her. The light isn't a weapon, it's a bridge. Elias doesn't run this time. He walks toward the wolf as the shadows burst through the cavern walls. He places his hand on her silver brow, and for the first time, he doesn't feel fear. He feels her ancient memories, the centuries she spent alone, watching the world grow cold, waiting for a single soul, brave enough to share the fire. In a blinding flash of gold and silver, the spark leaves his chest, but it doesn't leave him empty. It expands, weaving his spirit with hers. They are no longer a man and a beast. They are a singular force of nature. The shadows don't just retreat, they are vaporized, turned into mist by a light that understands that the only way to conquer darkness is to fill it with purpose. The cave falls silent. The air is warm now. The wolf stands taller, her fur shimmering with an unbreakable glow, and Elias finds that his wounds are gone, replaced by a strength he never knew he could possess. He was the key to a door that was never meant to be opened by force, but by a hand reached out in trust. The true cost of the light wasn't his life, it was his fear. He had to lose the man he was, the runner, the hider, the victim, to become the partner of a god. The creature didn't save him because she was hungry. She saved him because she was lonely, and because the universe itself demanded that the light find a home in a heart that knew what it was like to be cold. Their journey doesn't end in this cave. It begins here. Together, they step out into a world that is no longer terrifying, for they carry the dawn within them. The sentinel and the spark, bound by a debt that can never be repaid, only lived. This story serves as a reminder to all of us at Chronicle Nexus. Sometimes the things we are running from are the very things trying to carry us home. We spend our lives terrified of the monsters at our heels, never realizing that they might be the only ones who see the value of the light we carry inside. What is the spark inside you? What are you running from that might actually be your salvation? These are the questions that define our existence. If this journey has moved you, if you felt the chill of the shadows and the warmth of the Silver Sentinel's light, then you belong here with us. We explore the depths of the unknown, the mysteries of the soul, and the legends that breathe beneath the surface of our reality. Don't let your spark go out in the dark. Join our community, and let's explore the infinite together. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who might be running from their own guardian. Your support allows us to keep bringing these epic tales to life. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a chapter in the unfolding saga of the human spirit. This has been another deep dive from Chronicle Nexus. The story never truly ends. It only changes shape. Until next time, Keep your eyes on the stars and your heart open to the wild. We'll see you in the next Chronicle. Stay bold, stay curious, and above all, stay illuminated. Farewell.